candles flickered across Julian's face as I prepared to deliver what I thought would be the perfect punchline to cap off his 36th birthday dinner. The private dining room at Romano's buzzed with the comfortable chatter of family. His mother Vera, his brother Marcus, my mother Ruth, and our 7-year-old daughter Isla. Everyone was relaxed, wine glasses half empty, the mood light. "You know what's funny about Julian?" I said, raising my voice just enough to capture everyone's attention. The conversations died down as all eyes turned to me. "We don't actually listen to him at home. I mean, he's so quiet anyway. I make all the real decisions." I expected laughter. I expected knowing nods from the other wives about how men could be so passive. Instead, I got uncomfortable silence. Marcus cleared his throat. "That's quite a thing to say at his birthday dinner, Lysandra." "Oh, come on," I laughed, waving my hand dismissively. "It's just teasing. Julian knows I'm kidding, don't you, honey?" Julian looked up from his plate, his dark eyes meeting mine for just a moment before he reached for his phone. Not to take a photo of the cake, as I initially thought, but to open his notes app. I watched him type something quickly, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who spent his days as a court stenographer. "What are you doing?" I asked, still smiling but feeling the first flutter of irritation. "Just making a note," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. "The date, the time, what was said, who is present." Vera shifted in her seat, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Julian, sweetheart, why don't you tell us about that interesting case you mentioned last week?" But Julian had already pocketed his phone and returned to his cake, cutting precise, small bites, while the conversation awkwardly resumed around him. Later that night, as we drove home in silence, Isla chattering in the back seat about the chocolate cake, I replayed the evening in my mind. Julian's reaction bothered me more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't like him to be so methodical about a simple joke. "You're being too sensitive," I said finally, breaking the silence as we pulled into our apartment complex parking garage. "Am I?" Julian asked, his voice still that same quiet tone. "4 times now, Lysandra. 4 separate occasions where you've publicly dismissed my input or decision-making ability. I'm starting to see a pattern." "A pattern?" I laughed, but it sounded forced even to my own ears. "Julian, you're overthinking this. It was just a joke." He helped Isla out of her car seat, lifting her easily despite her protests that she was too big to be carried. "Maybe," he said, "but I'm going to keep track anyway, just in case." As we rode the elevator to our 4th-floor apartment, I watched Julian in the polished metal doors. His reflection looked different somehow, more focused, more alert than the passive man I'd grown accustomed to living with over the past 8 years of marriage. That night, after Isla was tucked into bed and Julian had disappeared into his small study, I found myself standing outside his door. I could hear the soft clicking of his keyboard, the occasional rustle of papers. He was organizing something, filing something away. I knocked softly. "Julian, what are you working on so late?" "Just some case notes," came his muffled reply. "Nothing that would interest you." The dismissal stung more than I expected. When had Julian started shutting me out of his work? When had he started locking his study door? I tried the handle anyway. Locked. "Julian, why is the door locked?" A pause. "I've got some sensitive court documents in here. Confidential material. It's better this way." I stood there for a moment longer, listening to the continued clicking of keys, before retreating to our bedroom. As I got ready for bed, I told myself I was overreacting. Julian was just being Julian, quiet, methodical, probably making mountains out of molehills as usual. But, as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Julian slept beside me with his back turned, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted during those few seconds at the restaurant. The way he'd looked at me when I made that joke, the immediate reach for his phone, the careful notation of time and witnesses. It was like he'd been waiting for me to say something like that, like he'd been preparing for it. The thought should have worried me more than it did. Over the next few weeks, I decided to take more active control of our household finances. Julian had always been too passive about money anyway, content to let his paychecks accumulate in our joint account while I handled the bills and budgeting. But his recent bonus from the court system, a substantial sum for his work on a high-profile case, needed more strategic handling. I transferred the entire amount to my personal account on a Tuesday morning while Julian was at work. It was a simple online transaction, completed in less than 30 seconds. The money would be safer there, I reasoned, where I could invest it properly instead of letting it sit earning minimal interest. That evening, Julian noticed immediately. "Lysandra, there's a large withdrawal from our joint account," he said, standing in the kitchen doorway with his laptop open, the banking website displayed on the screen. $15,000. Did you move it somewhere? "I put it in my personal investment account," I said, not looking up from the dinner I was preparing. "The interest rates are much better, and you know I'm better with financial planning." Without discussing it with me first, I turned to face him, spatula in hand. "Julian, it's not like you were going to do anything productive with it. You would have just left it sitting there. It was my bonus. And we're married. What's yours is mine, right?" I smiled, but Julian's expression remained unchanged. He was looking at me with that same focused attention I'd noticed at the restaurant. "I'd like access to that account," he said quietly. "Why? You never cared about the investments before." "I'd like access to the account where my bonus is being held." The repetition, the careful phrasing, it reminded me of his work voice, the tone he used when reading back testimony in court. Precise, unemotional, creating a clear record. "Julian, you're being paranoid. It's just better financial management." He nodded slowly, then closed the laptop. "I see. And the password change on our joint account, when did that happen?" I felt a small spike of annoyance. "I updated our security settings. There have been a lot of banking scams lately." "Without telling me the new password." "I'll write it down for you." "I'd prefer if we changed it together, to something we both know." I set down the spatula and turned to face him fully. "Julian, what's gotten into you lately? Ever since your birthday, you've been acting strange, suspicious. It's not attractive." "I'm not trying to be attractive," he said. "I'm trying to understand why my wife is making unilateral financial decisions and then characterizing my questions about it as paranoia." The formal language, the careful word choice, it was like living with a court reporter even at home, which I supposed I was. "Fine," I said. "We'll change the password together this weekend." But I didn't intend to follow through. Instead, I spent the next few days making additional changes. I updated the mailing address on several of our accounts to my office, ensuring that statements and important documents would come directly to me. I filed our tax return using the married filing separately status for the first time in our marriage, claiming the majority of our deductions. Julian discovered each change methodically, bringing them to my attention with the same calm, precise tone. "The mortgage statement is now being mailed to your office. The tax return was filed without my signature. My access to our investment portfolio has been revoked." Each time I had a reasonable explanation: better security, simpler processing, streamlined management, and each time Julian would nod, make a note in his phone, and retreat to his locked study. It was during this period that Isla began parroting some of the things I'd said about Julian's role in our household. At a family barbecue at Vera's house, she announced to her grandmother, "Daddy doesn't decide things. Mommy makes the important choices." Vera's face went very still. "Is that so, sweetheart?" "Uh-huh. Daddy just goes to work and writes down what people say. Mommy handles the real stuff." I laughed it off. "Kids pick up everything, don't they?" She's just repeating something she overheard. But Marcus, who was flipping burgers nearby, had stopped what he was doing. That's a pretty specific thing for a 7-year-old to overhear and remember. Children are perceptive, I said lightly. They notice family dynamics. They do, Vera agreed, but her tone was cold. They notice when one parent is being diminished. Later that evening, Julian emerged from his study with a manila folder in his hands. He sat down at the kitchen table where I was reviewing some work documents and placed the folder between us. "What's this?" I asked. "A timeline," Julian said. "Every instance of public dismissal, every unilateral financial decision, every time you've characterized my input as irrelevant or unnecessary. Dates, times, witnesses present." I opened the folder and found myself looking at a meticulously organized spreadsheet. Each row contained a date, location, description of incident, and names of people who were present. The birthday dinner was there, along with incidents I'd forgotten, comments I'd made at dinner parties, decisions I'd announced without consultation, moments when I'd corrected or contradicted him in front of others. "Julian, this is..." I searched for the right word. "This is obsessive. This is documentation." Documentation of what? Me being a strong, decisive wife? Documentation of a pattern of behavior that I'm beginning to recognize as problematic. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. "I think you need to talk to someone, Julian. This level of tracking, it's not normal." "You're right," he said, surprising me. "I do need to talk to someone. I've already made an appointment with a counselor. For both of us." "I don't need counseling." "Then come to support me," Julian said. "If this is all in my head, if I'm misinterpreting normal marital dynamics, then a professional can help me understand that." I agreed, primarily because I was confident that any reasonable therapist would see Julian's behavior as the real problem. The obsessive note-taking, the suspicious monitoring of our finances, the formal, legalistic way he'd started speaking to me. Clearly, he was the one who needed help. I had no idea that Julian had specifically sought out a counselor who specialized in recognizing patterns of emotional and financial abuse. My relationship with Damon Rusk had started innocently enough. As the director of the nonprofit where I worked as an events coordinator, he was charismatic, decisive, and appreciated my organizational skills in ways that Julian never seemed to. Our late-night strategy sessions had become more frequent over the past few months, often extending well past normal business hours as we planned fundraising galas and donor cultivation events. "You're wasted in that marriage," Damon said one evening, as we worked alone in his corner office, the city lights twinkling through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Julian doesn't see your potential." I looked up from the donor database I'd been updating. "What do you mean?" "You're brilliant, Lysandra. The way you handled the Morrison Foundation proposal, the creativity you brought to the spring gala, your executive material. But you're constantly having to manage a husband who can't even make basic household decisions." It was validating to hear someone else acknowledge what I'd been feeling for years. Julian's passivity, his tendency to defer to my judgment, his quiet acceptance of whatever I decided. It was exhausting being the only adult in the relationship. "He's gotten weird lately," I confided. "Suspicious, controlling. He's tracking our conversations, making lists of things I say." Damon leaned back in his leather chair, his expression concerned. "That sounds like classic manipulative behavior, making you feel like you're the problem when he's the one who's being controlling." Our first kiss happened 2 weeks later, after a particularly successful donor event. We'd raised more money than ever before, and the adrenaline of success had made us both giddy. When Damon suggested we celebrate with drinks at his downtown condo, it felt natural to say yes. "Julian's working late anyway," I said, though I hadn't actually checked. "Court transcription project." Damon's condo was everything our modest apartment wasn't: spacious, modern, with a view of the harbor. As we sat on his leather sofa with glasses of wine, talking about our shared vision for the nonprofit's future, the attraction that had been building for months finally found its expression. I told myself it wasn't really an affair. It was validation, appreciation, a recognition of my worth that I wasn't getting at home. Damon saw me as an equal partner, someone whose opinions mattered, whose decisions were respected. Our strategy sessions became a regular occurrence. I would update my calendar with legitimate-sounding meetings, donor development planning, strategic initiative review, board preparation session, and spend hours at Damon's place, talking about work and life and the future we might build together. "You should leave him," Damon said one evening as we lay in his king-sized bed, the city lights casting patterns on the ceiling. "You're too dynamic for that kind of suffocating relationship." "It's complicated," I said. "There's Isla to consider. Kids are resilient. She'd be better off with a mother who's fulfilled and happy." I began preparing Isla for the possibility of changes in our family structure. Nothing dramatic, just gentle conversations about how sometimes parents needed different things, how love could take many forms, how she would always be the most important thing in both Mommy's and Daddy's lives. "Does Daddy make you sad, Mommy?" she asked one evening as I was tucking her into bed. "Sometimes grown-ups just grow in different directions," I said carefully, "but that doesn't change how much we both love you." "Marcus says Daddy is really smart and that his job is important." "Uncle Marcus is right. Daddy is very good at his job, but there are different kinds of smart, sweetheart, different ways of being important." I began coaching her gently, helping her understand the dynamics of our household in terms that would make sense to a child. How Mommy handled the big decisions, how Daddy was more comfortable letting other people take charge, how some people were natural leaders and others were natural followers. "It's not bad," I explained. "It's just how people are. Some people are like Mommy. They like to plan things and make choices. Other people are like Daddy. They're happier when someone else handles the big stuff." Isla absorbed these conversations with the serious attention children give to information about their world. She began incorporating these concepts into her play, her conversations with friends, her interactions with both Julian and me. At the mandatory counseling sessions Julian had arranged, I found myself growing frustrated with Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the therapist he'd selected. She seemed more interested in Julian's perspective than in understanding the real dynamics of our relationship. "Lysandra, can you help me understand why it's important to you that Julian's input be minimized in family decisions?" Dr. Hernandez asked during our third session. "I don't minimize his input," I said. "I just recognize that I'm better at certain things. Julian is very passive. He's more comfortable when I take the lead." "Is that true, Julian?" Dr. Hernandez asked. Julian looked directly at me for a moment before answering. "I used to think I was being supportive by deferring to Lysandra's preferences. I'm starting to realize that my opinions and decisions have been systematically dismissed or overruled, regardless of their merit." "That's not true," I said quickly. "Julian, you know I value your input." "When was the last time one of my suggestions or decisions was implemented without modification or reversal?" Julian asked. I opened my mouth to respond, then realized I couldn't think of a recent example. "That's because you don't usually have strong opinions about things. Or because my opinions aren't solicited or considered." Dr. Hernandez made a note in her file. "Julian, you mentioned that you've been documenting certain interactions. Can you tell me about that?" Julian reached into his briefcase and withdrew a familiar manila folder. "I've been tracking instances where my input is publicly dismissed or where unilateral decisions are made about shared resources or responsibilities. This is what I mean," I said to Dr. Hernandez. "This obsessive tracking behavior, it's not normal. It's not uncommon for people in certain situations to begin documenting patterns they're concerned about," Dr. Hernandez said carefully. "Julian, what prompted you to start keeping these records?" "My birthday dinner," Julian said. "When Lysandra told our extended family that they don't listen to me at home because I don't make real decisions. It was the fourth time she'd made similar statements in public, and I realized I needed to start paying attention to the pattern. Dr. Hernandez reviewed Julian's documentation with professional interest, asking questions about specific incidents, timelines, and my responses to his concerns about each situation. Lysandra, how do you respond to Julian's characterization of these events? I think he's taking normal marital dynamics and turning them into something sinister, I said. I'm a strong woman. I take initiative. If that makes Julian uncomfortable, maybe he needs to examine his own issues with successful women. But even as I said it, I could see Dr. Hernandez making notes, and something in her expression suggested she wasn't buying my interpretation of events. After that session, I made a decision. If Julian wanted to play games with documentation and professional opinions, I could play those games too. I would file for divorce first, on my terms, with my narrative of events. It was time to take control of the situation before Julian's obsessive behavior made things more complicated than they needed to be. I spent the next several weeks preparing my divorce filing, consulting with Patricia Wells, a family law attorney my mother had recommended. Patricia was known for her aggressive advocacy for women in difficult marriages, and she listened sympathetically as I described Julian's recent behavior. The obsessive tracking is concerning, Patricia agreed, reviewing the notes I'd made about Julian's documentation habits. It suggests controlling tendencies, possibly escalating. That's what I thought, I said, and the way he's been questioning every financial decision, demanding access to accounts, making me feel like I have to justify every choice. It's becoming impossible to live with. What about your daughter? How is she handling the tension in the home? Isla is very perceptive. She's noticed that Daddy has become more withdrawn and suspicious. I think she'd be more comfortable in a stable environment where she doesn't have to witness this kind of behavior. Patricia nodded, making notes. We'll want to file quickly, before his behavior escalates further. In the meantime, I'd recommend documenting any instances where his tracking or questioning makes you feel unsafe or controlled. I felt empowered leaving Patricia's office. Finally, someone understood what I was dealing with. Julian's quiet, methodical approach to our problems wasn't reasonable. It was manipulative. His documentation wasn't protective. It was obsessive. That evening, I sat Isla down for another gentle conversation about family changes. Sweetheart, you know how Mommy and Daddy have been having some grown-up disagreements lately? Isla nodded solemnly. Daddy's been staying in his office a lot. That's right, and sometimes when grown-ups can't solve their problems, they need to make some changes. But no matter what changes happen, both Mommy and Daddy will always love you very, very much. Are you and Daddy getting divorced? She asked with the directness that children sometimes possess. We might need to live in different places for a while, I said carefully. But you'll still see both of us all the time. And if anyone asks you questions about our family, it's important that you tell them the truth about how things are at home. What truth? About how Mommy handles most of the important decisions, and how Daddy has been acting differently lately. If someone asks you who makes the choices in our family, what would you say? You do, Mommy. That's right. And if they ask you whether Daddy's opinion matters for big decisions, what would you say? Isla thought for a moment. That Daddy doesn't decide things. Exactly. Because that's how our family works, isn't it? Mommy makes the plans, and Daddy goes along with them. I filed for divorce on a Thursday morning, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting primary custody of Isla, continued residence in our apartment, and a fair division of assets. Patricia had crafted the petition carefully, emphasizing Julian's recent controlling behavior and my role as Isla's primary caretaker. Julian was served the papers at work, which I thought would be more discreet than having a process server come to the apartment. I didn't want Isla to witness that kind of drama. When Julian came home that evening, he was carrying his usual briefcase, plus a larger leather portfolio I hadn't seen before. We need to talk, he said quietly. I assume you got the papers, I said. Julian, I hope you understand this isn't about hurting you. It's about creating a healthier environment for all of us. Is it? Julian set both bags down on the kitchen counter and looked at me with that same focused attention I'd grown accustomed to. Lysandra, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. Are you having an affair? The question hit me like a physical blow. What? Julian, why would you ask me that? Because I've been trying to understand why our marriage deteriorated so quickly, and I've noticed some patterns in your schedule and behavior that are difficult to explain otherwise. What patterns? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Julian opened the leather portfolio and withdrew a stack of papers. Your calendar shows multiple late-night meetings with Damon Rusk over the past 4 months, meetings that often run past midnight, according to your phone's location data. Those are work meetings, Julian, important strategy sessions. At his residential address, I felt my face flush. Sometimes we work at his place when the office is too distracting. Your phone's Wi-Fi logs show connections to his home network on 17 different occasions, often for periods of 6 to 8 hours. The precision of his information was unsettling. Julian, this is exactly the kind of obsessive tracking I'm talking about. You're monitoring my phone? We share a family data plan. The logs are accessible to both of us, though I don't think you've ever looked at them. Julian spread several documents across the counter, printouts of calendar entries, location data, Wi-Fi connection logs, even credit card statements showing charges at restaurants near Damon's condo. This is stalking, I said, my voice rising. This is exactly why I filed for divorce. You've become paranoid and controlling. Have I? Julian asked. Or have I become attentive to information that was always available, but that I chose not to examine? I want you to stop monitoring my activities immediately. I'm not monitoring anything, Lysandra. I'm reviewing data that you've generated through your own choices and activities. The distinction felt important to him, though I couldn't understand why. Everything about Julian's behavior had become legalistic, as if he were building a case rather than trying to save our marriage. Are you recording this conversation? I asked suddenly. No, Julian said, but I am going to make notes about it afterward, including your response to direct questions about your relationship with Damon Rusk. There is no relationship beyond work. Julian nodded and made a note in his phone. Noted, direct denial of affair when presented with circumstantial evidence. That night, after Julian had retreated to his study, I called Damon from the balcony of our apartment. He knows, I said without preamble. Knows what? About us. He's been tracking my phone, my calendar, everything. He has logs, Damon, data. There was a long pause. What kind of data? Location information, Wi-Fi connections, credit card statements. He knows I've been at your place. That's not proof of anything, Damon said, but his voice had changed. Lots of people have work meetings at home. He asked me directly if I was having an affair. What did you tell him? I denied it, obviously. But Damon, he's building some kind of case. This isn't just a jealous husband. He's approaching this like a legal proceeding. Another pause. Lysandra, maybe we should cool things down for a while, until your divorce is finalized. Cool things down? Just be more careful, more discreet. After I hung up, I stood on the balcony for a long time, looking out at the city lights and trying to understand how my carefully managed life had become so complicated. Julian had never been suspicious before, never questioned my activities or decisions. His transformation into this methodical, documentation-focused person was unsettling. But I wasn't going to be intimidated. If Julian wanted to play legal games, I had my own attorney and my own strategy. The key was to stay focused on the real issue, his controlling behavior, and not let him distract from that with wild accusations and circumstantial evidence. I had no idea that Julian's portfolio contained far more than phone logs and calendar entries. I had no idea that his methodical nature, combined with his professional expertise in documenting testimony and evidence, had produced a comprehensive record that would be very difficult to explain away. And I had no idea that the process server, who would soon be looking for me, had a much thicker envelope than the one I'd had delivered to Julian. The process server found me at Damon's office on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. I was in the middle of what we'd started calling our donor strategy meetings, though by that point, very little actual work was getting done during our time together. Lysandra Keene, the woman in the professional suit, stood in the doorway of Damon's glass-walled office, holding a thick manila envelope. Yes? You're being served with legal documents. Please sign here. I was aware of the entire office watching through the glass walls as I signed for the envelope. Damon had gone very still in his chair behind his desk, his face pale. The envelope was much thicker than the divorce petition I'd had served to Julian. When I opened it, I found myself looking at a counter-petition for divorce, along with several exhibits labelled A through M. Exhibit A was a timeline of my public dismissals of Julian's input, complete with dates, locations, and witness names. Exhibit B was a comprehensive financial analysis showing my unilateral control of our accounts, including the transfer of Julian's bonus, password changes, and redirection of mail. Exhibit C was a compilation of calendar entries and location data documenting my relationship with Damon. Exhibit D was a series of photographs, apparently taken from our apartment building's parking garage, showing my car at Damon's condo at various late-night and early morning hours. Exhibit E was a transcript of Isla's conversation with her school counselor, in which she'd repeated several of the things I'd taught her about family decision-making. I stopped reading and looked up at Damon, who was staring at the documents spread across his desk. "This is bad," he said quietly. "It's circumstantial," I said, though my voice sounded shaky even to my own ears. "None of this proves anything definitive. Lysandra, there are photographs of your car, time-stamped photographs. That proves I was there. It doesn't prove what we were doing." But even as I said it, I knew how weak it sounded. The sheer volume of documentation, the precision of the timeline, the professional presentation of the evidence, it looked exactly like what it was. My phone rang. Patricia Wells, my attorney. "Lysandra, I just received a copy of your husband's counter-petition. We need to meet immediately." "How bad is it?" "It's comprehensive. Your husband has been building this case for months, and he's done it very professionally. Can you come in this afternoon?" I gathered the documents and left Damon's office, acutely aware of the stares and whispers following me out. By the time I reached Patricia's office, word had somehow already spread through my workplace's gossip network. My phone was buzzing with text messages from colleagues. "This is a problem," Patricia said after reviewing Julian's filing. "Your husband has documented a clear pattern of what could be characterized as financial abuse and emotional manipulation. And the evidence of an affair is substantial. What do we do? We need to be prepared for the possibility that your original petition won't be successful. Julian is requesting primary custody, exclusive use of the marital residence, and a division of assets that heavily favors him based on your financial misconduct." Financial misconduct? Moving his bonus without consent, changing account passwords, redirecting mail. These are classic signs of financial abuse, Lysandra, combined with the documented pattern of public humiliation and the evidence of an affair with your supervisor. Patricia trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "Can we challenge the evidence?" "We can try, but it's all legally obtained. He had access to the family data plan, the financial accounts were joint, the photographs were taken from a public location. There's nothing here that wouldn't be admissible." That evening, I tried to have a calm conversation with Julian about resolving our issues without a prolonged legal battle. "This doesn't have to be ugly," I said as he sat at the kitchen table, reviewing more documents from his seemingly endless collection. We can work out a reasonable arrangement. I think we're past that point, Julian said without looking up. Julian, I know you're hurt, but think about Isla. Do you really want to put her through a custody battle? Now he did look up, and his expression was unlike anything I'd ever seen from him before. Lysandra, you coached our 7-year-old daughter to tell a custody evaluator that my opinions don't matter in our family. You used our child as a weapon in your strategy to marginalize me, and you're asking me to think about her welfare. I never coached her to say anything untrue. You taught her to dismiss her father's role in the family to support your narrative in a legal proceeding. That's parental alienation, and it's a form of child abuse. The clinical terminology, delivered in Julian's quiet, precise voice, was more unsettling than if he'd shouted at me. I want to settle this reasonably, I said. Then you should have considered that before you transferred my bonus without permission, locked me out of our accounts, and started an affair with your boss. I didn't. Lysandra, Julian interrupted, and his voice carried a note of finality I'd never heard before. I have 17 instances of you being at Damon Rusk's residence for extended periods, often overnight. I have deleted calendar entries that were recovered from your phone's backup data. I have credit card charges for dinners and hotels that correspond with your work travel that I've now confirmed never involved actual business trips. He opened another folder and spread additional documents across the table. I also have a statement from Damon's wife, who hired a private investigator after she noticed charges on their joint credit card for restaurants and activities that didn't match his reported schedule. My heart stopped. His wife knows. His wife has been documenting his activities for longer than I've been documenting yours. She contacted me after she saw your name repeatedly in his calendar and credit card statements. The room felt like it was spinning. Julian, The custody evaluation is next week, Julian said, gathering his documents. I'd recommend being honest with the evaluator about what you've taught Isla to say and why. Children her age often break down under gentle questioning when they're repeating rehearsed statements rather than expressing their own observations. As Julian left the kitchen, I realized that my careful strategy had collapsed entirely. Every move I'd made to protect my interests had been documented, analyzed, and countered by a man I'd dismissed as too passive to be a threat. The man who'd sat quietly through my public humiliations hadn't been accepting them. He'd been recording them. The man who'd seemed not to notice my affair hadn't been oblivious. He'd been building a comprehensive case with the help of Damon's betrayed wife. I was no longer in control of the narrative, and I was beginning to understand that I never really had been. The custody evaluation took place in a sterile office building downtown, in rooms designed to be non-threatening to children. Dr. Sarah Chen, the court-appointed evaluator, had interviewed both Julian and me separately before meeting with Isla. I'd spent hours preparing Isla for the meeting, reminding her of our conversations about family dynamics and decision-making roles. But when she emerged from her session with Dr. Chen, she looked confused and upset. "Mommy, why did the lady keep asking me the same questions in different ways?" Isla asked as we walked to the parking garage. "What kind of questions, sweetheart?" "About who I like to talk to when I'm sad, and who helps me with homework, and who knows what my favorite things are." My heart sank. Those weren't the questions I'd prepared her for. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," Isla said, and something in her voice sounded different. "I told her that Daddy listens to me and that you're always busy with work." "Isla, remember what we talked about how Mommy makes the important decisions in our family." But the lady asked me if I thought Daddy was smart, and I said yes because he is smart, and she asked if Daddy's opinion matters to me, and I said yes because it does matter. I realized that Dr. Chen had been asking Isla about her own relationship with her parents, not about the power dynamics I'd tried to teach her to recognize and report. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. Patricia had warned me that Julian's evidence was strong, but I wasn't prepared for the comprehensive presentation his attorney made to the court. Julian had hired Rebecca Martinez, a family law attorney who specialized in cases involving financial abuse and parental alienation. Rebecca's presentation was methodical, professional, and devastating. She walked the judge through the timeline of public humiliations, complete with witness statements from Marcus, Vera, and several family friends who had observed my treatment of Julian at social gatherings. She presented the financial evidence, not just the transferred bonus, but a pattern of unilateral financial decisions spanning 18 months, including the redirection of mail, changes to account passwords, and the separate tax filing that had been done without Julian's knowledge or signature. She presented the affair evidence, not just the circumstantial location data, but corroborating testimony from Damon's wife, who had been conducting her own investigation and was now filing for divorce as well. Most damaging of all, she presented Dr. Chen's custody evaluation report, which documented clear evidence that Isla had been coached to give specific answers about her father's role in the family, and that this coaching had caused the child significant confusion and distress. Your Honor, Rebecca said in conclusion, Mr. Keene has been subjected to a systematic campaign of financial control, public humiliation, and parental alienation. The evidence shows a clear pattern of coercive behavior designed to marginalize his role as both a husband and a father. We request primary custody of the minor child, exclusive use of the marital residence, and a division of assets that reflects Mrs. Keene's financial misconduct. When Patricia stood to present my case, she had little to work with beyond character attacks on Julian's obsessive documentation and arguments that I'd been a devoted mother and wife who was being unfairly characterized. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Judge Harrison had clearly reviewed it thoroughly before the hearing. Mrs. Keene, Judge Harrison said, addressing me directly, do you understand that coaching a child to give specific answers in a custody evaluation is considered a form of emotional abuse? Your Honor, I never told my daughter to lie. You taught her to minimize her father's role in the family to support your legal strategy. That's parental alienation, and it's harmful to the child regardless of your intentions. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Julian was awarded primary custody of Isla, with me receiving supervised visitation until I completed parenting classes and counseling. Julian was granted exclusive use of our apartment. The financial assets were divided in his favor, with the court ordering me to repay the bonus I'd transferred without permission. But the most devastating blow came after the hearing, as we stood in the courthouse hallway. Lysandra, Julian said, approaching me with that same leather portfolio he'd been carrying for weeks. There's one more thing. He handed me a document I hadn't seen before, a complaint filed with my employer's HR department, detailing my affair with Damon and the violation of company policy regarding relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Julian, you can't... I didn't file this, Julian said quietly. Damon's wife did. She sent copies to your board of directors, your major donors, and the local media outlets that cover non-profit organizations. As if on cue, my phone began buzzing with calls from reporters, board members, and colleagues. The scandal was already spreading through the tight-knit non-profit community. Why? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because actions have consequences, Julian said, because you can't systematically destroy someone's dignity and expect them to protect your reputation in return. Damon had been suspended pending investigation. The board was calling for my resignation. My mother had stopped returning my calls after seeing the court documents. Even my own attorney had suggested that I might want to consider relocating to avoid the ongoing publicity. As I stood in the courthouse hallway, watching Julian walk away, with his quiet dignity intact and his rights restored, I finally understood the magnitude of what I'd lost. Not just the marriage, the custody, the apartment, or even the career, but the respect of everyone who had witnessed my behavior and its consequences. The man I'd dismissed as too passive to matter had methodically, legally, and completely dismantled the life I'd built on his marginalization. He'd done it without raising his voice, without breaking any laws, without stooping to the kind of behavior I'd subjected him to. He'd simply documented the truth and let it speak for itself. 6 months later, I was living in a small apartment across town, working at a different nonprofit for significantly less money, and seeing my daughter for 4 hours every Sunday under the supervision of a court-appointed monitor. Julian had kept the apartment, the respect of our friends and family, and most importantly, Isla's daily presence in his life. The last time I saw him was at Isla's school play. He was sitting in the front row, taking pictures and applauding enthusiastically when she took her bow. Vera and Marcus were beside him, and Isla ran to hug all three of them after the performance. When she saw me in the back of the auditorium, she waved politely, but didn't leave Julian's side. She'd learned, through experience rather than coaching, whose opinions actually mattered in her life. As I watched them leave together, Julian carrying Isla's costume bag, listening attentively as she chatted about the performance, I realized that his voice had always mattered. I'd just been too busy talking to hear it. Now, in the quiet of my empty apartment, his silence spoke louder than my words ever had.